Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. This is Breaking Spectre for another edition of Midnight Rider. Good to have you aboard for the broadcast. We're going to cover some things here today. A little more on the COVID-19 related stuff, some of the things that I'm seeing pertaining to vaccines, a long piece in that I'm going to try and get into by way of a Whitney Webb piece, which if you've ever followed any of her work, you know that she is very thorough in her approach. So we're going to hit that, a couple other articles in that regard as well. So stick around and we'll see you back here on the other side. Warning. These social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre. Alright, welcome back. Like I said, we got a little bit to get to here this morning. A little bit different approach here, doing things a little bit different, streaming out to multiple platforms here, as opposed to what I have traditionally done over on the Tiger Network. If you're not over there, you can check out the channel over on Torah3.com. As I'm broadcasting over there, also kicking out to YouTube, Twitch, and DLive here for this broadcast. Like I said, we're testing things out, as it were, so we'll give it a go, see what happens, and here we go. Alright, so that being said, let's get into it. Out of the American Institute for Economic Research, 5 times this year, the New York Times accidentally told the truth. And this article was penned on the 29th of December, so obviously in reference to 2020. But yes, the old paper of record, the New York Times, periodically does get it right. But by far and large, obviously, as we see POTUS typically tweet out, they are fake news. And so here we go. The paper of record in 2020 shifted dramatically to the most illiberal stance possible on the virus, pushing for full lockdowns and ignoring or burying any information that might contradict the case for this unprecedented experiment in social and economic control. This article highlights the exceptions. Says the first shocking sign of the placing of a persistent bias was a podcast with reporter Donald McNeil on February 27th. This was the beginning. It was grossly irresponsible. He asserted that half the American public would get this disease and that it would have a case fatality rate of 2.5%, or 25 times as deadly as the flu, hence 4.8 million dead people. No consideration of demographic gradients and risk, and no knowledge of viral basics such as the trade-off between severity and prevalence. Even if you leave aside the fog of fatality miscalculation, or misclassification rather, he exaggerated the risk by 12 times, but still spoke with a sense of certainty designed to create panic. Gee, doesn't that sound an awful lot like Neil Ferguson over in the UK and his ridiculous assertions, outdated 12-year-old models, and based on the flu? Seems like it's out of the same playbook, right? Host Michael Barbaro himself seemed shocked. I thought you were here to bring calm, Donald. I'm trying to bring a sense that if things don't change, a lot of us might die, he said. If you have 300 relatively close friends and acquaintances, 6 of them would die. The primal fear of disease is thus thrown into massive overdrive following 100 years in which public health tried to bring rationality to the topic. That podcast was followed by an op-ed by the same journalist/pundit to take on the coronavirus, go medieval on it. It seemed incredible that such a responsible outlet would advocate the overthrow of a century of public health wisdom and even immunological basics, but that's what they did. At this point, the New York Times was fully committed to the narrative that we must dismantle society to save it. And there it has been for nearly a year of unbearably biased coverage. Even within the blatant and aggressive pro-lockdown bias and consistent with the way the New York Times does its work, the paper has not been entirely barren of truth about COVID and lockdowns. Below, I list 5 times that the news section of the paper, however inadvertently and however buried deep within the paper, actually told the truth. So here we go, here's the 5. Number 1, your coronavirus test is positive. Maybe it shouldn't be. And this is a byline by Apurva Mandavili. Says, I'm still stunned that the paper did a study that confirmed what people have suspected, namely that a high cycle threshold used on PCR testing was creating the appearance of a pandemic that might have long receded. The testing mania was generating wild illusions of millions of asymptomatic carriers and spreaders. How severe was the problem? Read this and weep. Says in 3 sets of testing data that included cycle thresholds compiled by officials in Massachusetts, New York, and Nevada, up to 90% of people testing positive carried barely any virus, a review by the Times found. On Thursday, the United States recorded 45,604 new coronavirus cases, according to a database maintained by the Times, and if the rates of contagiousness in Massachusetts and New York were to apply nationwide, then perhaps only 4,500 of these people may actually need to isolate and submit to contact tracing. The implications of this revelation was incredible. A major reason for the ongoing lockdowns are due to the pouring in of positive case numbers from massive testing. If 90% of these positive tests are false, we might have a major problem. The whole basis of the panic disappears. All credit to the Times for running the article, but why no follow-up and why no change in its editorial stance? Very, very good questions, right? Number 2, scientists see signs of lasting immunity to COVID-19 even after mild infections. A byline by Catherine J. Wu. This has gone missing this year, and public commentary has been much at all about naturally acquired immunities from the virus, even though the immune system deserves credit for why humankind has lasted this long, even in the presence of pathogens. That the Times ran this piece was another exception in otherwise exceptionally bad coverage. It said, in part, scientists who have been monitoring immune responses to the virus are now starting to see encouraging signs of strong, lasting immunity, even in people who developed only mild symptoms of COVID-19. A flurry of new studies suggests disease-fighting antibodies, as well as immune cells called B cells and T cells that are capable of recognizing the virus, appear to persist months after infections have resolved, an encouraging echo of the body's enduring response to other viruses. Researchers have yet to find unambiguous evidence that coronavirus reinfections are occurring, especially within the few months that the virus has been rippling through the human population. The prospect of immune memory helps to explain that, Dr. Pepper said. Dr. Pepper? Yeah, and by the way, how in the world did we ever survive without big pharma and everything for hundreds of years prior to all of that stuff? Dear God, how did we ever make it? Number 3, why you shouldn't worry about studies showing waning coronavirus antibodies. Another byline by Apurva Mandavili. Says, reinforcing the solid point above, data from monkeys suggests that even low levels of antibodies can prevent serious illness from the virus, if not a reinfection. Even if circulating antibody levels are undetectable, the body retains the memory of the pathogen. If it crosses paths with the virus again, balloon-like cells that live in the bone marrow can mass-produce antibodies within hours. Number 4, school children seem unlikely to fuel coronavirus surges, scientists say. Yet another byline by Apurva Mandavili. So again, why do we have all these school shutdowns, de Blasio, Cuomo, and company? It's still a shock that so many schools closed their doors this year, partly from disease panic, but also from compliance with orders from public health officials. Nothing like this has happened, and the kids have been brutalized as a result, not to mention the families who found themselves unable to cope at home. For millions of students, a whole year of schooling is gone, and they have been taught to treat their fellow human beings as nothing more than disease vectors. So it was amazing to read this story in the Times. So far, schools do not seem to be stoking community transmission of the coronavirus, according to data emerging from random testing in the United States and Britain. Elementary schools especially seem to see remarkably few infections. And number 5. 1/3 of all U.S. coronavirus deaths are nursing home residents or workers. A byline by Karen Yorish, KK Rebecca Lay, Daniel Ivory, and Mitch Smith says another strangely missing part of mainstream coverage has been, honestly, about the risk gradient in the population. It is admitted, even by the World Health Organization, that the case fatality rate for COVID-19 from people under the age of 70 is 0.05%. The serious danger is for people with low life expectancy and broken immune systems. Knowing that, as we have since, February, we should have expected the need for special protection for nursing homes. It was incredibly obvious. Instead of doing that, some governors shoved COVID patients into nursing homes. Cuomo, Wolf, you guys. Astonishingly, in any case, the above article, and this one too, was one of the few times this year that the Times actually spelled out the many thousands of times risks to the aged and sick as versus the young and healthy. And of course, not to be outdone, there is a notable opinion column. Says the op-ed page of the paper mirrored the news coverage with only a handful of exceptions. Those are noted below. Is our fight against coronavirus worse than the disease? Op-ed penned by David Katz. Says, I am deeply concerned at the social, economic, and public health consequences of this near total meltdown of normal life. Schools, businesses closed, gatherings banned, will be long-lasting and calamitous, possibly graver than the direct toll of the virus itself. The stock market will bounce back in time, but many businesses never will. The unemployment, impoverishment, and despair likely to result will be public health scourges of the first order. Worse, I fear our efforts will do little to contain the virus because we have a resource-constrained, fragmented, perennially underfunded public health system. Distributing such limited resources so widely, so shallowly, and so haphazardly is a formula for failure. How certain are you of the best ways to protect your most vulnerable loved ones? How readily can you get tested? And another article says quarantine may negatively affect kids' immune systems. Op-ed by Donna L. Farber and Thomas Connors. Says during the COVID-19 pandemic, the world is unwittingly conducting what amounts to be the largest immunological experiment in history on our children. We have been keeping children inside, relentlessly sanitizing their living spaces and their hands, and largely isolating them. In doing so, we have prevented large numbers of them from becoming infected or transmitting the virus. But in the course of social distancing to mitigate the spread, we may also be unintentionally inhibiting the proper development of children's immune systems. And, of course, what has lockdown done to us? Op-ed by Drew Holden. Says our mental health suffers, too. The psychological effects of loneliness are a health risk comparable with risk obesity or smoking. Anxiety and depression have spiked since lockdown orders went into effect. The weeks immediately following them saw nearly an 18% jump in overdose deaths, and, as of last month, more than 40 states had reported increases. 1 in 4 young adults aged 18 to 25 reported seriously considering suicide within the 30-day window of a recent study. Experts fear that suicides may increase for young Americans. These concerns are even more acute. Calls to domestic violence hotlines have soared. America's elderly are dying from the isolation that was meant to keep them safe. So yes, very, very interesting. we do occasionally see a little bit of truth out of the New York Times, as this article highlights. But by far and large, I think the bulk of the truthful information obviously lies in the independent and alternative medias, which, of course, when you broadcast it on platforms like these, may tend to get frowned upon and censored or blacklisted, what have you. But nonetheless, we persevere, right? All right, that being said, let's get into the next article I've got. It says, How Social Engineers Use Weaponized Psychology to Push Unproven Vaccines. And of course, this is on the cusp of the Pfizer, BioNTech, and AstraZeneca vaccines, the Modernas and that are now being kicked out and distributed, UK, US, you name it, and we're seeing a lot of pushback. Heck, we've seen down in Tennessee various nurses take the vaccine and immediately pass out. You know, that's always good for the press. But nonetheless, we get this. Says, in the coming months, a warp speed, unprecedentedly rushed COVID-19 vaccine will likely be approved and subsequently introduced to market. Whereas most vaccines take 10 or more years to develop at a minimum, a necessary precaution to screen for adverse reactions in human test subjects who receive them, the COVID-19 vaccines currently in development across the globe will likely make it to market in less than a year from the starting line. And of course, POTUS, we've heard, push that and, kind of beats his chest a little bit about how quickly it's been done, but does it come at a cost? Well, the monkey wrench in the pharmaceutical machinery, though, may prove to be widespread and rightful skepticism on the part of the public regarding the safety and or efficacy of the eventual vaccine. That people will be harmed by the COVID-19 vaccine once it is introduced to the public is inevitable. All vaccines, which rejigger the immune system to produce antibodies against the targeted pathogen, can cause adverse reactions in a small percentage of the populations that receive them, even the safest, most thoroughly vetted ones. The scientific, physiological reality is not disputed even by vaccine advocates. In fact, in the last 30 years, the U.S. government, using taxpayer money, has compensated victims of adverse reactions to vaccines to the tune of $4.4 billion. The COVID-19 vaccine will be no exception in terms of the damage it will inflict. In fact, because of the rushed nature of the vetting process and the proposed population-wide vaccination regimen, it will likely be far more destructive than previous vaccines in terms of scale. And I guess I'll pause right there and help the audience remember that all of these big pharma folks have already got the provisions in place by law for liability protections. So when they're highlighting the $4.4 billion in damages, they're not talking about, the typical, hey, I got sick or perhaps I even died as a result of taking one of your products. No, you can't sue these folks. You have to go to the secret courts behind the scenes. That's where that $4.4 billion comes from. Despite the serious health risks assumed by taking a vaccine pushed so rapidly through the vetting process, some Americans will undoubtedly roll up their sleeves. Others, though, will not. In fact, the number of Americans who hesitate to commit to taking the vaccine has been steadily rising since the novel coronavirus outbreak began. In a recent Gallup poll on Americans' willingness to submit to a COVID-19 vaccine, a mere half of the respondents said they would be willing to receive the vaccine once it becomes available. This hesitancy on the part of the American public poses a potentially unforeseen dilemma for pharmaceutical firms and their cronies in government, which have spent billions developing these vaccines at breakneck speed. How best to prod, cajole, shame, or otherwise manipulate the American citizenry into accepting the vaccine once it has achieved FDA approval? Well, we can already see several strategies at work in this regard. The PR campaign to promote COVID-19 vaccination is now approaching climax. Humans are hardwired to seek inclusion in social groups. In earlier epochs, our survival depended obviously and heavily on the social groups to which we belonged. Although the material reality of life has changed dramatically for humans since the dawn of civilization, those social imperatives carved deep into our innate psychology have remained. Social engineers know and understand the basic desire for social inclusion and use it as a tool. Humans intuit the in-group, out-group dynamic, who are sensitive to lines drawn between insiders and outsiders, and, whether consciously or subconsciously, modify our behavior to fit the mold of the inside group. If atomized outsiders can be convinced that the insiders in society get vaccinated, they are more likely to adopt confirmative behavior as a result. You can glimpse this strategy at play in public campaigns to promote vaccination. Consider the following graphic from Healthy Newborn Network. Oh, protected together, the vaccines network. Everybody holding hands, a very diverse group, right? Isn't that how they get you? And oh, by the way, not to mention in society at large, what are we seeing play out across the industries? Especially if you want to travel by plane. Oh, if you want to fly Qantas, you got to have your vaccination card to be able to fly with us. Or any of the other multitude of air carriers and that who wish to do business and transport your butt across the pond or what have you. You just need to have the little card, that's all, just to fly with us. We'll see how well that works out. Part of belonging to a social group is the protection of, or at least the performative mimicry of protection of, vulnerable members of the group. We instinctively recognize and value the behavior in other members of the in-group, and in turn they are held in higher collective esteem. In this way, group members who exhibit concern for the welfare of others gain standing and secure their position in the group. Again, the social engineers recognize this group dynamic and play on it to promote compliance with COVID-19 public health measures. Consider this PSA from the Texas Medical Association. Oh, not all heroes wear capes, but they do wear masks. Be a #MaskHero. Yeah. Be part of the in crowd. Wear your mask. Do your part. Slow the spread. Never mind the fact that the byproduct of that is you're rebreathing carbon dioxide that is a natural thing that we expunge from our mouths when we breathe, and never mind the fact that there's this little bacteria in that comes out of your breath as well that you're now rebreathing back into your lungs. But hey, do your part. Be part of the cool crowd. By obvious insinuation, if you don't comply with public health measures, such as vaccinations to contain the spread of COVID-19, then you do not love and care for the elderly and other vulnerable populations, and are thus ripe to be excised from the social group. In this way, in exercising your inborn right to make your own medical choices, you risk becoming a pariah. When the vaccine is marked as a pitch to end the pandemic once and for all and save millions of lives, the screws will turn even tighter. The pressure to vaccinate will further intensify, and those who do not wish to comply will be forced to make hard decisions about how committed they are to exercising their rights. Oh, wait a minute. I thought Dr. Fauci said, there's no guarantee that the vaccine's going to work, and you're still going to have to mask afterwards, folks. Wait, what? Oh, and what about the early vaccines he was talking about? Oh, those weren't really vaccines at all, and you may still get it? What level of doublespeak BS are we seeing out of these guys? Should we even really believe them at this point? I think not. At which point, we may arrive at another related tactic the social engineers are sure to use. Fear installation. Simple, yet effective. It goes something like, if you don't get the vaccine, X millions of innocent lives will be lost. You who refuse to vaccinate, in turn, would be responsible for those deaths. No one, save a psychopath, wants to be a murderer, or widely regarded by members of the in-group as one. Huh? Wait a minute. Do you carry that same regard with people who die in car crashes or drug overdoses or any other means that people die? If emotional appeals fail, the social engineers will be forced to move on to physically alienating and ultimately excising the problematic outgroup members from society. The federal government and its corporate partners will set the agenda from on high to be filtered down to smaller sectors of the economy and lower levels of government. And here we go. Here come the flights I was just speaking of. International and interstate flights, which are governed by the federal government, will require COVID-19's immunity passports from travelers to board flights. The military will require vaccinations for new recruits. The largest businesses with the closest ties to the federal government will likely be the first to make COVID-19 vaccination a standard prerequisite for employment. In short, while vaccination at gunpoint will remain unconstitutional, the effort will be instead to make economic survival impossible for those who refuse to vaccinate themselves and their family. Apart from becoming a social pariah, being cut off from access to much-needed resources and institutions will make living normal life virtually impossible. State and local governments will not be immune from these tactics. If local jurisdictions refuse to implement complementary regulatory regimes related to COVID-19, they will be coerced from on high, with threats of withholding federal funding, if need be, to comply. This will mean that, jurisdiction by jurisdiction and measure by measure, the pressure to comply will compound. Unvaccinated children will be unable to attend public school. Public meetings will be closed off to unvaccinated community members. Sports and concert venues will be forced to require proof of vaccine to attend out of fear of legal liability. Access to public resources at the local level as well as the federal level will be cut off for the unvaccinated. Thus, the psychological screws are tightened further. With no access to participation in the economy or society, how many American families will be able to resist, no matter how steadfast their opposition to an unproven COVID-19 might be? As a society, we have arrived at a determinative crossroads for the future prospects of personal liberty. One path leads to the maintenance of a quasi-free society where the individual retains some degree of medical autonomy, and the other leads to a dystopian new norm, the domination of public health decision-making by a small group of largely unelected and unaccountable social engineers. And that article penned by Ben Barty, a Bangkok-based American journalist, writing there and carried up by the Daily Bell. So yes, the new norm, right? Isn't that what we're looking forward to as part of this great reset? You know, the whole COVID-19 was never about health. It's always about control. It's about bending you over, getting you ready for what is to come via Klaus Schwab and company and the World Economic Forum, Davos folks, and their great reset that I've talked about pretty much ad nauseum now. That's the cover story. It's about compliance. In any case, yes, it's going to drive division. The question I have for folks is, will the people stand up? Are we going to see the small businesses that are being locked down, chased out of business, revive themselves and go against the grain and stand up for their personal liberty? Or are we going to continue to sit and complain and cry about the fact that we see parking lots full and the local Walmarts and other big box stores reaping the benefits? You know, because at the end of the day, the government isn't going to mandate this. No. They'll just get their partners in crime, corporations, to do their bidding for them, as we have seen done since this thing has taken off. And that's why you go to the big box stores, you may or may not have to wear a mask or get kicked out of the store, as yours truly has done in the past. But that's what we're going to have to come to realize. All right. Carrying that theme on, let's get into the Google side of things. Google has a financial interest to push the pandemic and the COVID-19 vaccine experiments. Well, of course they do. Cui bono? Who benefits at the end of the day? So out of natural news, Google Ventures, the venture capital arm of Google, is in a position to profit from the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. The developers of the vaccine, Adrian Hill and Sarah Gilbert, set up a company called Vaxitech to attract outside investors to their new vaccine projects. Google co-founder Larry Page and his wife Lucy have already partnered with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to design a flu vaccine that would protect broadly against the strains of flu that infect people every winter and those in nature that could emerge to trigger a disruptive and deadly pandemic. Ever since Google invested in Bill Gates' global vaccine programs, the big tech dictator has engaged in vaccine censorship, targeting and removing any scientific information about vaccine injury and the faults of vaccine-augmented immune responses. So Google to help convince the world that COVID-19 vaccines are needed annually? Well, Google's widely used video platform, YouTube, is now banning any skeptical scientific content that deviates from the official COVID-19 narrative. Any information about virus shedding from live virus vaccines is deemed misinformation. Any studies that show how influenza vaccines cause susceptibility to coronavirus infection are censored. Google and YouTube are actively working to brainwash people, to prolong pandemic fears, to maximize submission to their vaccine projects. But their plan is even greater than this. In order to obtain royalties from the sale of the vaccine, the financiers behind Vaccitech and the Oxford vaccine will need to convince the world that these COVID-19 vaccines are needed at regular intervals every year. The first two-shot protocol is an experiment to see how many people will comply and how well these people will tolerate the vaccines. Vaccine injuries are being normalized during this process. So see how this dovetails into the social engineering side of things that I just covered? Yeah, they're trying to sell you a bill of goods here. Their intentions are clear. Oxford medical professor John Bell told NBC News that the world will need regular vaccinations against coronavirus every year. Bell is the architect of the Oxford-AstraZeneca partnership and stands to benefit financially from the annual distribution of the vaccines. You know, just like Mr. Fauci and Ms. Birx and company and their various ties to, the global initiative by old Bill Gates and company, right? Cui bono. Pascal Soriot, the CEO of AstraZeneca, is ready to declare COVID-19 a seasonal illness that will require regular vaccinations in order to cash in on their investment with Vaccitech. Google needs the World Health Organization to declare the pandemic a seasonal illness. WebMD is already on board with the plan. So, folks, just like what we spoke of many, many months ago now, COVID-19 vaccine? Not enough? Well, we get a new strain. Next year, we throw the dart at the wall. Well, here comes the COVID-20 vaccine. Next year, COVID-21. By the way, where did the flu go this year? Hello? Influenza A? Influenza B? Anyone? And why are we still going and getting vaccinations down at your local Walgreens or CVS? Vaccitech CEO Bill Enright said that Google and all of Vaccitech's investors will receive a big chunk of the royalties, as well as milestone payments when the pandemic is declared over and the vaccines are used on a seasonal basis. Vaccitech has already received £2.3 million of public funding to develop the second generation of COVID-19 vaccines, as our investors prepare to cash in on the swindle indefinitely. And mind you, folks, if you don't recall that Big Pharma's push for being a $50 billion industry by the year 2025, I would encourage you to look that up. That has been in play for some time now. Google will help suppress the real public health issues to promote the faulty vaccines they are invested in. No conflict of interest, of course. In order to stay consistent with the science in the clinical trials, vaccine recipients will need to submit to upwards of 6 shots every year, guaranteeing royalties for Google and other financiers. COVID-19 vaccines are a dependency program designed to capitalize on human fears for years to come, while generating revenue for a broken system of immunology. News outlets are already drumming up the fear of another coronavirus strain, and vaccines are already being developed to ensure the world that another round of COVID protection is on its way. The vaccines do not protect people from the chronic state of malnutrition that is the well-documented reason why people suffer from complications and death to the infection. The vaccines do not improve the efficiency of the individual's microbiome or mucous membranes to help eliminate viruses from the body. The vaccines do not remove the immune suppressant, drugs, and food from a person's lifestyle. The real reasons why people with underlying conditions are dying from multiple comorbidities. The vaccines do not protect against medical error, nosocomial infections, however you say that, ventilator-associated pneumonia, or lung damage from ventilators that drive up the mortality rate in some of the most improperly ran inner-city hospitals. These are just a few of the real public health issues, but Google and YouTube will continue to suppress the root of the problem while pushing the vaccines they are heavily invested in. And of course, as Mike Adams and company over at Natural News do, you can check out more pandemic-related stuff at evilgoogle.news. So there you go. And last but not least, but the biggest article to cover here this morning on this edition of Midnight Rider, the coup de grace, the COVID-19 vaccine developers Oxford AstraZeneca linked to British Eugenics movement. Evil Google what? Yeah, remember when they used to have that mantra, don't be evil, and then they removed that here a couple years ago? Look at who they're aligning themselves with here. So out of Great Game, India, article penned by Whitney Webb, which if you followed any of her work at her Unlimited Hangout site or the days when she was still over at Mint Press News, good article. The developers of the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine have previously undisclosed ties to the renamed British Eugenics Society, as well as other eugenics-linked institutions like the Wellcome Trust. And there we see it, Jeremy Lafredo and Whitney Webb on this one. So as this one covers, says the landmark COVID-19 agreement, the GlaxoSmithKline and the Jenner Institute, Vaxitech doing well by doing good, the Wellcome Trust, the Galton Institute, Eugenics by the 21st Century, who gets the safest vaccines, and eugenics under another name. So we'll see how far we get into this. If nothing else, I'll drop the link out there in chat. You guys can pick it up, depending on how much gas I have in the tank to try and whittle through this thing. See, is the landmark COVID-19 agreement. On April 30th, AstraZeneca and Oxford University announced a landmark agreement for the development of a COVID-19 vaccine. The agreement involves AstraZeneca overseeing aspects of the development, as well as manufacturing and distribution, while the Oxford side, via the Jenner Institute and Oxford Vaccine Group, researched and developed the vaccine. Less than a month after this agreement was reached, the Oxford-AstraZeneca partnership was awarded a contract from the U.S. government as part of Operation Warp Speed, the public-private COVID-19 vaccination effort dominated by the U.S. military and U.S. intelligence. Though the partnership was announced in April, Oxford's Jenner Institute had hardly already begun developing the COVID-19 vaccine months before, in mid-January. According to a recent BBC report, it was in January that the Jenner Institute first became aware of how serious the pandemic would soon become, when Professor Andrew Pollard, who works for both the Jenner Institute and heads the Oxford Vaccine Group, shared a taxi with a modeler who worked for the UK's Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. During the taxi ride, the scientist told him data suggested there was going to be a pandemic not unlike the 1918 flu. Due to this sole encounter, we're told, the Jenner Institute then began to pour millions into the early development of a vaccine of COVID-19 well before the scope of the crisis was clear. I'm going to pause there for a second. Does that make sense to you? Oh, I just hopped in an old taxi here, and some model just told me, hey, this thing looks like it's going to be like the 1918 flu, and here, let me get on my phone and get a hold of some cronies and that I know and shovel some millions of dollars in, and let's get ahead of this thing. Let's start building a vaccine long ahead. No. And folks, if you've followed any of the work that I've done here, you'll know that life LifeSite, I think it was, or LifeSite News, I can't remember which outlet, carried this article that says that, hey, just like everything else, this particular strain was engineered. And who is it engineered by? Well, guess who holds the patent for it? None other than a Rothschild. And that was SARS-CoV-1. Well, SARS-CoV-2 had to be modified, so they just interjected and did a little tweaking on it, and lo and behold, we get one that has a little bit of a taste of an HIV strain in it. How soon in advance do you think that took place relative to all this coming down the pike? And oh, by the way, don't forget about Event 201 that just so happened to take place and modeled all this stuff back in October 2019. You think any of these guys might have been tied to that? Jumping in a taxi with a model, please. For much of 2020, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was treated as an early frontrunner, though its lead would later be marred by scandals related to its clinical trials, including the deaths of participants, sudden trial pauses, the use of a problematic placebo with its own host of side effects, and the unintentional misdosing of some participants that skewed its self-reported efficacy rate. The significant issues that emerged during trials have provoked little concern from the vaccine's two lead developers, despite critical attention from even mainstream media of its complications. The lead developer of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, Adrian Hill, told NBC on December 9th that the experimental vaccine should be approved and distributed to the public before the conclusion of the safety trials, saying, "To wait for the end of the trial would be the middle of next year. That's too late. This vaccine is effective, available at large scale, and easily deployed." Where do we think we get this 95% efficacy business from? Sarah Gilbert, the other lead researcher on the vaccine, seemed to believe that the premature safety approval was likely, telling the BBC on December 13th that the chances of rolling out the vaccine by the end of the year are pretty high. Now, the UK is expected to approve the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine shortly after Christmas, with India also set to approve the vaccine next week. While the controversies surrounding the vaccine's trials did ultimately undermine its previous front-runner status, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine remains heavily promoted as the vaccine of choice for the developing world, as it is cheaper and has much less complicated storage requirements than its main competitors Pfizer and Moderna. And by the way, don't forget the fact that somebody in the EU already released the prices and net of all these things a little bit too transparent over in the EU. So, yeah, you can do the comparisons across the board. Says earlier this month, Dr. Richard Horton, the editor-in-chief of the Lancet Medical Journal, told CNBC that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is the vaccine right now that is going to be able to immunize the planet more effectively, more rapidly than any other vaccines we have, in large part because it is a vaccine that can get to lower middle-income countries. CNBC also quoted Andrew Baum, global head of healthcare for Citigroup, as saying that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is really the only vaccine that is going to suppress or even eradicate SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19 in the many millions of individuals in the developing world. Eliminate it? How do you eliminate something that's been man-made? Please, tell us again how this was derived in Wuhan by some bat soup BS. In addition to long-standing claims that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine will be the vaccine of choice for the developing world, this vaccine candidate has also been treated by several outlets in the mainstream and even independent media as good for people, bad for profits, due to the partnership's explicit intention of supplying the vaccine around the world on a not-for-profit basis, meaning that the poorest nations on the planet will not have to worry about being shut out of a cure due to lack of funds. And now they're pushing this as a cure? Yeah, I think I'll stick to my vitamin C, D, zinc, Z-Pack, all that good regimen. Oh, by the way, something cheaper yet, hydroxychloroquine. Hello? However, investigation into the vaccine's developers and the realities of their no-profit pledge reveals a very different story than that which has been spun for most of the year by corporate press releases, experts, and academics tied to the vaccine and the mainstream press. For instance, mainstream media has had little, if anything, to say about the role of the vaccine developer's private company, Vaccitech, in the Oxford-AstraZeneca partnership, a company whose main investors include former top Deutsche Bank executive, Silicon Valley behemoth Google, and the UK government. All of them stand to profit from the vaccine alongside the vaccine's two developers, Adrian Hill and Sarah Gilbert, who retain an estimated 10% stake in the company. Another overlooked point is the plan to dramatically alter the current sales model for the vaccine following the initial wave of its administration, which would see profits soar, especially if the now obvious push to make COVID-19 vaccination an annual affair for the foreseeable future is made reality. Yet, arguably most troubling of all is the direct link of the vaccine's lead developers to the Wellcome Trust, and in the case of Adrian Hill, the Galton Institute, two groups with long-standing ties to the UK Eugenics movement. The latter organization, named for the father of eugenics, Francis Galton, is the renamed UK Eugenics Society, a group notorious for its promotion of racist pseudoscience and efforts to improve racial stock by reducing the population of those deemed inferior for over a century. Look away, folks, you're not supposed to know this. The ties of Adrian Hill to the Galton Institute should raise obvious concerns given the push to make the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine he developed with Gilbert the vaccine of choice for the developing world, particularly countries in Latin America, South and Southeast Asia, and Africa, the very areas where the Galton Institute's past members have called for reducing population growth. In the final installment of the series on Operation Warp Speed, the U.S. government's vaccination effort and race, the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine ties to eugenics-linked institutions, the secret role of Vaccitech, and the myth of the vaccine sales being non-profit and altruistically motivated are explored in detail. So GlaxoSmithKline and the Jenner Institute. The Edward Jenner Institute for Vaccine Research was initially established in 1995 in Compton, in Berkshire, as a public-private partnership between the UK government, via the Medical Research Council, and the Department of Health, and the pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline. Following a review by the Institute's sponsors, it was relaunched in 2005 in Oxford under the leadership of Adrian Hill, who, prior to that appointment, held a senior position at the Wellcome Trust Center for Human Genetics. Hill, the lead developer of the Oxford-AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine, still leads a research group at Wellcome aimed at understanding the genetic basis of susceptibility to different infectious diseases, especially severe respiratory infections, which conducts most of its studies in Africa. The UK's Medical Research Council has also become a collaborator with the Wellcome Trust, specifically on vaccine-related initiatives. The Wellcome Trust, discussed at greater length later in this article, was originally created with funding from Henry Wellcome, who founded the company that later became GSK. Hill's partner at the Jenner Institute and other co-developer of the Oxford COVID-19 vaccine is Sarah Gilbert. Gilbert also hails from the Wellcome Trust, where she was a program director and is a student of Hill's. Together, Gilbert and Hill have worked to position the Institute to be the center of all future vaccination efforts undertaken in response to global pandemics. There you see Sarah Gilbert there. The Jenner Institute's relocation to Oxford was largely facilitated by the Medical Research Council, which donated £1.25 million between 2005 and 2006 after the decision was made to replace the Institute's original sponsors, GlaxoSmithKline, the Medical Research Council, the Department of Health, with the University of Oxford and the Institute for Animal Health, now called the Pirbright Institute. The involvement of Pirbright meant that relaunched Jenner Institute became unique in developing vaccines for both humans and livestock. That's interesting. The relaunched Jenner Institute has come to dominate publicly funded vaccine development in the UK, as well as the testing of vaccines produced by the world's largest pharmaceutical companies via clinical trials, and has overseen prominent safety trials for vaccines of high media interest in recent years. Some of the Jenner Institute conducted trials later draw controversy, such as those using South African infants in 2009, in which 7 infants died. An investigation conducted by the British Medical Journal found that the Hill-led Jenner Institute had, in the South African instance, knowingly misled parents about the negative results of and questionable methods used in animal studies, as well the vaccine being known to be ineffective. The vaccine in question, an experimental tuberculosis vaccine developed jointly by Emergent Biosolutions and the Jenner Institute, was scrapped after the controversial study in infants confirmed what was already known, that the vaccine was ineffective. The trial, largely funded by Oxford and the Wellcome Trust, was subsequently praised as historic by the BBC. Hill, at the time the study was conducted, had a personal financial stake in the vaccine. These guys just can't help themselves, can they? Cui bono? Who benefits? Similar instances of dodgy practices in efficacy trials and the effects of increased dosages have led vaccine experts to criticize the COVID-19 vaccine developed by Hill and Gilbert. Hill and Gilbert held a considerable financial stake in the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. While the vaccine reportedly has an efficacy of over 90%, those figures, often cited in mainstream reports, are self-reported by the vaccine's developers and manufacturers. In effect, the Oxford team and AstraZeneca, which is significant given that Hill and other Jenner Institute scientists have previously been caught manipulating trial results to benefit a vaccine product in which they were personally invested. Nothing to see here, folks. Look away. The prominence of the Jenner Institute in vaccine development and testing has largely come through Hill's additional leadership role at the UK's Vaccines Network, which chooses what vaccines to develop, how to develop them, and which firms should receive targeted investments from the UK government. The Vaccines Network also plays a key role in identifying what vaccine technologies could play an important role in future outbreaks. Two of the main backers of the UK's vaccine network are the Wellcome Trust and GlaxoSmithKline. Unsurprisingly, the Vaccines Network has steered many millions of pounds toward the Hill-run Jenner Institute, with completed projects including a plug-and-display virus-like particle platform for rapid response vaccination. Also funded by the Vaccines Network are the Jenner Institute's initial studies of novel chimpanzee adenovirus vaccines for coronavirus, in this case MERS, the same viral vector used for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. In addition to the Vaccines Network, the Jenner Institute also coordinates the efforts of the EU's Vaccines Network equivalent, Multi-Melvax. And there we see Mr. Hill. The Jenner Institute also has a close relationship with GlaxoSmithKline and the Italian biotech Okyros, which was acquired by GlaxoSmithKline in 2014. Soon after it was acquired, Okyros and its new owner, GlaxoSmithKline, became key players in the 2014 experimental Ebola vaccine push, an effort that mirrors the current COVID-19 vaccine development rush in many key ways. The rushed safety trials for that vaccine were overseen by Adrian Hill and the Jenner Institute and funded by the UK government and the Wellcome Trust. GlaxoSmithKline and Okyros are the only firms represented on the Jenner Institute's Scientific Advisory Board. The Jenner Institute, along with GlaxoSmithKline, Okyros, and a small French biotech called Emoxio, have been developing an experimental malaria vaccine since 2015, with human trials the vaccine announced on December 12, 2020. Those trials will be conducted on 4,800 children in Africa over the course of 2021. In many of the same country where Hill's research group at the Wellcome Center for Human Genetics has been studying genetic susceptibility to several diseases. A lot more people will die in Africa this year from malaria than will die from COVID, Hill recently said in regard to the soon-to-begin trials. Wait a minute, malaria? Isn't that what chloroquine initially was made use of, especially when the British were over in India? By the way, that was yet another article on Great Game India that I covered many months ago. But a vaccine for everybody, right? Currently, the Jenner Institute is funded by the Jenner Vaccine Foundation, but the foundation's documents note on several occasions a considerable influx of money from Wellcome Trust Strategic Awards. A special review panel from the Wellcome Trust actually lobbied the Jenner Institute to apply for further strategic core funding from the trust after visiting the institute and appraising its work. The Jenner Institute frames its funding from Wellcome as a key guidance behind its development decisions, which are based on the successful model of Wellcome Trust Strategic Award support. The Jenner Institute's foundation, however, is not the only source of income for its lead researchers. Hill and Gilbert have been working to commercialize many of the Institute's vaccines through their own private company, Vaccitech. Though media reports often describe the vaccine as being a joint effort between AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford, Vaccitech is a key stakeholder in that partnership, given that the vaccine candidate relies on technology developed by Hill and Gilbert and owned by Vaccitech. A deeper look into Vaccitech offers a clue as to why the company's name has been absent from nearly all media reports on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, as it demolishes the much-touted claim that the vaccine is non-profit and offered at low cost for charitable reasons. So now down the Vaccitech rabbit hole we go. Vaccitech, doing well by doing good? The official reason Sarah Gilbert and Adrian Hill created Vaccitech in 2016, per The Times, is because Oxford's researchers are encouraged to form companies to commercialize their work. Vaccitech, like other commercialized Oxford research enterprises, was spun out of the Jenner Institute via the university's commercialization arm, Oxford Science Innovations, which is currently Vaccitech's largest stakeholder at 46%. Hill and Gilbert are reported to maintain a 10% stake in the company. The largest investor in Oxford Science Innovations, and by extension one of the largest shareholders in Vaccitech, is Bravos Capital. The venture capital firm started in 2019 by Andrew Crawford Brunt, Deutsche Bank's longtime global head of equity trading at its London branch. Through its stake in Oxford Science Innovations, Bravos owns about 9% of Vaccitech. Prior to COVID-19, Vaccitech's main focus, especially last year, was the development of a universal vaccine for the flu. Vaccitech's efforts in this regard were praised by Google, which is also invested in Vaccitech, and at the same time, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was funding research to develop a universal flu vaccine. Reportedly, because the field of influenza vaccinology was not yet able to, quote, design a flu vaccine that would protect broadly against the strains of flu that infect people every winter and those in nature that could emerge to trigger a disruptive and deadly pandemic, end quote, according to a Stat News report from last year. The Gates Foundation effort originally partnered with Google's co-founder Larry Page and his wife Lucy. To fully finance Hill and Gilbert's Vaccitech, and specifically its quest to develop a universal flu vaccine, Oxford Science Innovations sought £600 million from outside investors, chief among them the Wellcome Trust and the venture capital arm of Google, Google Ventures. This means that Google is poised to make a profit from the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine at a time when its video platform YouTube has moved to ban COVID-19 vaccine-related content that shines a negative light on COVID-19 vaccines, including the Oxford AstraZeneca candidate. Other investors in Vaccitech include Sequoia Capital's Chinese branch and the Chinese pharmaceutical company Fosun Pharma. In addition, the UK government has put an estimated £5 million into the company and is also expected to make a return on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Information on the profit motive behind the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine has been muddled due to the extensive media promotion of the claim that Hill and Gilbert will not be collecting royalties on the vaccine and that AstraZeneca is not making a profit off the vaccine. However, this is only true until the pandemic is quote-unquote officially declared over and the virus is labeled a persistent or seasonal condition that will require the mass administration of COVID-19 vaccines at regular intervals and possibly annually. Sky News reported that the determination of when the pandemic is over will be based on the views of a range of unspecified independent bodies. At that point, both Vaccitech and Oxford will obtain royalties from AstraZeneca's sale of the vaccine. Those tied to the vaccine have been at the center of promoting the idea that the COVID-19 vaccine will soon become an annual affair. For instance, in early May, John Bell, an Oxford medical professor and an architect of the Oxford-AstraZeneca partnership, told NBC News, "I suspect we may need to have relatively regular vaccinations against coronavirus going into the future," adding that the vaccine would likely be needed every year like the flu vaccine. NBC News failed to note that the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine in which Bell is involved stands to significantly benefit financially if that does come to pass. More recently, Bell told The Week that, should there prove to be a market for regular vaccinations against coronavirus in the future, there is some money to be made. Such sentiments have been echoed by Pascal Soriot, the CEO of AstraZeneca, who told Bloomberg last month that the company stood to make a reasonable profit once the pandemic was declared over and COVID-19 deemed a seasonal illness requiring regular vaccinations. On this matter, Vaccitech's CEO Bill Enright stated that Vaccitech's investors would receive a big chunk of the royalties from a successful vaccine, as well as milestone payments if and when the pandemic is declared over and COVID-19 vaccines become a seasonal event. Vaccitech, in particular, appears quite certain that this possibility is slated to become reality. For all subsequent iterations of the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine, Vaccitech will reacquire a much larger percentage of rights to the vaccine, rights it is currently splitting with Oxford for the first iteration. Sky News has noted that the technology that Vaccitech owns could drive the second generation of COVID-19 vaccines, and that it has already received £2.3 million of public funding to develop it. So, whip up the fear-mongering, and what have we seen in the UK especially? Oh, now we got a mutant strain. But no, nothing to worry about, folks. The vaccine we develop should be able to cover it all, right? See how this works? Step right up. COVID-19 vaccine this year, COVID-20 next year, and on we go. U.S. government officials such as Anthony Fauci have also signaled that the COVID-19 vaccine will require annual shots. Notably, the government, through Health and Human Services, BARDA, has poured over $1 billion into the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine development. In addition to government officials, several recent published mainstream media reports have claimed that the expert consensus seems to be leaning toward an annual shot like the flu vaccine with regards to the COVID-19 vaccine. For instance, Dr. Charles Chu, a professor of infectious diseases at the University of California, San Francisco, recently told Salon this may end up being a vaccine that's not a one-time thing or even a two-time thing. It may end up being what we call either a seasonal vaccine or a vaccine that needs to be administered every couple of years. Such hints about an annual COVID-19 vaccine from 2021 onwards have recently become commonplace from the leading COVID-19 vaccine manufacturers themselves. For instance, on December 13, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla was quoted by The Telegraph as saying, "How long this vaccine protection lasts is something we don't know. I think it is a likely scenario that you will need periodical vaccinations." Pfizer also recently issued a statement that noted that we don't know how the virus will change, and we also don't know how durable the protective effect of any vaccination will be, adding that its vaccine would be suitable for repeated administration as booster shots, in the event that the vaccine only induces an immune response for a few months. Then, This past Tuesday, Moderna released information that suggested immunity from its COVID-19 vaccine would only last several months, with Forbes writing that the duration of neutralizing antibodies from the Moderna vaccine will be relatively short, potentially less than a year, an outcome that would favor the push for an annual COVID-19 shot. The developer of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, Ugur Sahin of BioNTech, also stated on Tuesday that the virus will stay with us for the next 10 years. We need to get used to the fact that there will be more outbreaks. He later added that if the virus becomes more efficient, we might need a higher uptake of the vaccine for life to return to normal, implying that these regular outbreaks he foresees occurring over the next 10 years would be correlated with increased vaccine administration. Yep, you quickly see how they get to their $50 billion in sales across all these big pharma crooksters. Quotes from the developers of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine themselves also point to a pandemic-dominated future and a desire for the crisis to be prolonged so that the vaccine can be widely distributed. Gilbert told the UK Independent in August that she believes COVID-19 is just the beginning and that COVID-19-like pandemics will become more frequent in the near future. The Jenner Institute vaccine team seems so determined to create the COVID vaccine that, in June, Hill was quoted by the Washington Post in June as stating that he wanted the pandemic to stick around, saying, "We're in the bizarre position of wanting COVID to stay, at least for a little while, but cases are declining." He also stated that his team was in a race against the virus disappearing. Let that sink in, folks. With the vaccine developers, medical experts, government officials, and the CEOs of major vaccine manufacturers all agreeing that a seasonal COVID-19 vaccine is an increasingly likely outcome, it is worth considering a possible ulterior motive regarding the initial non-profit model being used by the Jenner Institute, Vaxitech, and AstraZeneca for their joint COVID-19 vaccine. Given that the vaccine guidance in several countries states that each dose of the multi-dose COVID-19 vaccine must be produced by the same manufacturer as previous doses, the implication is that in the event of a need for periodic COVID-19 vaccine variants, those who initially received the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine would likely be required to receive that same brand of vaccine seasonally. In other words, those who initially received the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine would likely be required not just to receive a second dose of the same brand, but continue receiving that same brand of vaccine every year. Notably, no interaction studies have yet been conducted on the interactions between the COVID-19 vaccines and other medications as well as other vaccines. If this turns out to be the case, it would certainly behoove the Oxford Vaxitech AstraZeneca team to want their vaccines to be the most widely used one in the first year in order to guarantee the largest market for subsequent annual COVID-19 vaccines. This could be a possible motive behind the efforts of the Oxford AstraZeneca partnership to supply the entire world with the Oxford jab, and to supply the vaccine to the most vulnerable groups to COVID-19. This vaccine has already been purchased, even before regulatory approval, by governments around the world, including in Europe, North America, Australia, and most Latin American countries. The Wellcome Trust. Adrian Hill currently holds a senior position at the Wellcome Trust Center for Human Genomics. The Wellcome Trust is a scientific charity based in London, established in 1936 with funds from pharmaceutical magnate Henry Wellcome. As previously mentioned, Wellcome founded the pharmaceutical company that eventually became the industry giant GlaxoSmithKline. Today, the Wellcome Trust has a $25.9 billion endowment and engages in philanthropic endeavors, including funding clinical trials and research. Hill has been closely tied to Wellcome for decades. In 1994, he participated in the founding of the Wellcome Center for Human Genetics and was awarded a Wellcome Trust Principal Research Fellowship the following year. He became a Wellcome Professor of Human Genetics in 1996. The Wellcome Center for Human Genetics website boasts of the large-scale genetic mapping they've conducted in Africa. The center also publishes papers that explore genetic dispositions in relation to male fertility and reproductive success. The crossroads between race and genes is important in the center's work, as an entire working group at the center, the Myers Group, is dedicated to mapping the genetic impacts of migration events. The center also funds a paper that argued that so long as eugenics is not coercive, it's an acceptable policy initiative. Did you catch that? So long as it is dedicated to mapping the genetic impacts of migration events, funded a paper that argued that so long as eugenics is not coercive, it's an acceptable policy initiative. The paper asks, is the fact that an action or policy is a case of eugenics necessarily a reason not to do it? According to Hill's page on the Wellcome Trust site, race and genetics have long played a central role in his scientific approach, and his group currently focuses on the role genetics play in African populations with regards to susceptibility to specific infectious diseases. Of even greater concern, last year, Science Mag reported that Wellcome was accused by both a whistleblower and the University of Cape Town, South Africa, of illegally exploiting hundreds of Africans by commercializing a gene chip without proper legal agreements and without the consent of hundreds of African people whose donated DNA was used to develop the chip. Gentina de Vries, a bioethicist at the University of Cape Town, South Africa, told the journal that it was clearly unethical. Since the controversy, other African institutions and peoples, such as the indigenous Nama peoples of Namibia, have demanded that Wellcome return the DNA it collected. The Wellcome Center regularly co-funds the research and development of vaccines and birth control methods with the Gates Foundation, a foundation that actively and admittedly engages in population and reproductive control in South Africa and South Asia by, among other things, prioritizing the widespread distribution of injectable, long-acting reversible contraceptives, LARCs. The Wellcome Trust has also directly funded studies that sought to develop methods to improve uptake of LARCs in places such as rural Rwanda. As researcher Jacob Levitch wrote in the Palgrave Encyclopedia of Imperialism and Anti-Imperialism, LARCs afford women in the Global South the least choice possible short of actual sterilization. Some LARCs can render women infertile for as long as 5 years, and as Levitch argues, they leave far more control in the hands of providers and less in the hands of women than condoms, oral contraceptives, or traditional methods. One example is Norplant, a contraceptive implant manufactured by Schering, now Bayer, that can prevent pregnancy for up to 5 years. It was taken off the U.S. market in 2002 after more than 50,000 women filed lawsuits against the company and the doctors who prescribed it. 70 of those class action suits were related to the side effects such as depression, extreme nausea, scalp hair loss, ovarian cysts, migraines, and excessive bleeding. Slightly modified and rebranded as Jadel, the dangerous drug was promoted in Africa by the Gates Foundation in conjunction with USAID and Engender Health. Formerly named the Sterilization League for Human Betterment, Engender Health's original mission, inspired by racial eugenics, was to improve the biological stock of the human race. Jadel is not approved by the FDA for use in the United States. Another scandal-ridden LARC is Pfizer's Depo-Provera, an injectable contraceptive used in several African and Asian countries. The Gates Foundation and USAID have collaborated to fund this drug's distribution and introduce it into the healthcare system of countries including Uganda, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Niger, Senegal, Bangladesh, and India. Andrew Pollard, director of the Oxford Vaccine Group where Hill's Jenner Institute resides, is enmeshed with the Gates Foundation. His employer, the University of Oxford, has received $11 million for vaccine development research from the foundation over the past 3 years and $208 million in grants over the past decades. In 2016, the Gates Foundation gave $36 million to a team of researchers that was headed by Pollard for vaccine development. In addition, Pollard's private laboratory is funded by the Gates Foundation. Given this, it should come as no surprise that the Global Alliance for Vaccine Initiative, Gavi, a public-private partnership founded and currently funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, plans to distribute the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine to low-income, predominantly African and Asian countries once it's approved. The Galton Institute, Eugenics for the 21st Century. Both the Wellcome Trust and Adrian Hill share a close relationship with the most infamous eugenics society in Europe, the British Eugenics Society. The Eugenics Society was renamed the Galton Institute in 1989, a name that pays homage to Sir Francis Galton, the so-called father of eugenics, a field that he often described as the science of improving racial stock. In the case of the Wellcome Trust, the Trust Library is a guardian of the Eugenics Society Historical Archives. When the Wellcome Trust first set up its Contemporary Medical Archives Center, the first organizational archive it sought to acquire was tellingly that of the Eugenics Society Galton Institute. Wellcome's website describes the Eugenics Society's original purpose as to increase public understanding of heredity and to influence parenthood in Britain, with the aim of biological improvements of the nation and mitigation of the burdens deemed to be imposed on society by the genetically unfit. It also states that the interests of the Society's members range from the biology of heredity, a subject that developed rapidly during the first half of the 20th century, to the provision of birth control methods, artificial insemination, statistics, sex education, and family allowances. Leslie Hall, Wellcome Senior Archivist, has referred to Francis Galton, a racist eugenicist, as an eminent late 19th century polymath, in our discussion of the Eugenics Society archive held at Wellcome. Several top governance positions at the former British Eugenics Society, now the Galton Institute, include individuals who originally worked at the Wellcome Trust, including the Galton Institute's president, Terry King, Dr. Elena Bochakova, a current Galton Council member and Galton lecturer, previously worked under the direction of Adrian Hill at the Wellcome Trust Center for Human Genetics. The Galton Institute senior genetics researcher, Dr. Jess Buxton, was previously a genetics researcher at the Wellcome Trust and then went on to carry out independent research financed by Wellcome. Her research, which is particularly race-oriented, includes creating the first genetic sequence map of a native Nigerian. However, Adrian Hill himself spoke at the Eugenics Society Galton Institute at the celebration of their 100th anniversary in 2008. The Galton Institute publishes what they now call the Galton Review, previously titled the Eugenics Review, where various members of the self-proclaimed Learned Society publish papers focused on population issues, genetics, evolutionary biology, and fertility. A look at early issues of the Eugenics Review shines a light on Galton's original ambitions. In the 1955 issue titled The Immigration of Colored People, an author asks, what will some of our national character, good workmanship, etc., in the course of a few decades, if this immigration of Negroes and Negroids continues unchecked? The article ends with an appeal to readers to write their parliamentary representatives and urge them that, in view of racial betterment or deterioration, something must be done urgently to check the present influx of Africans and other Negroids. Today, it appears that the Galton Institute continues to see the immigration of racial minorities into European cities as an unchecked threat. Mike Coleman, an Oxford professor of demographics and a fellow at the Institute, runs an anti-immigration organization and advocacy group called Migration Watch, whose mission is to preserve the European culture of the UK by lobbying the government to stem legal immigration and publishing data that supposedly demonstrates the biological and cultural threat of increasing immigration. A 1961 issue of the Eugenics Review titled The Impending Crisis claims the function of the Institute's upcoming conference is to honor Margaret Sanger and describes the population crisis as a quantity-threatening quality. Sanger, known as the pioneer of the American birth control movement, was a staunch advocate for promoting racial betterment and a key architect of the Negro Project, which she claimed was established for the benefit of the colored people. But as medical ethics fellow at Harvard Medical School, Harriet Washington, argues in her book, Medical Apartheid, the Negro Project sought to find the best way to reduce the black population by promoting eugenic principles. Sanger was an American member of the British Eugenics Society. Another early member of the Galton Institute was John Harvey Kellogg, prominent businessman and eugenicist. Kellogg founded the Race Betterment Foundation and argued that immigrants and non-whites would damage the American gene pool. Yet another example is Charles Davenport, a scientist known for his collaborative research efforts with eugenicists in Nazi Germany and his contributions to Nazi Germany's brutal racial policies, who was vice president of the Galton Institute in 1931. Another more recent member of the Galton Institute was David Weatherall, for whom the Weatherall Institute of Molecular Medicine at Oxford is named. Weatherall was a member of the Galton Institute when it was still named the Eugenics Society, and he remained a member until his death in 2018. Weatherall, who was knighted by the British monarch in 1987 for his contributions to science, addressed the Galton Institute on numerous occasions and gave a senior lecture on genetics at the Institute in 2014, of which no transcript or video is available. As an Oxford professor, Weatherall was Adrian Hill's doctoral advisor and eventually his boss when Hill began working at the Weatherall Institute conducting immunogenic research in Africa. A key fixture of Weatherall's Institute of Molecular Medicine since its founding is Walter Bodmer, a former president of the Galton Institute. While the Galton Institute has attempted to distance itself from its past of promoting racial eugenics with surface-level public relations efforts, it has not stopped family members of the infamous racist from achieving leadership positions at the Institute. Emeritus Professor of Molecular Genetics at the Galton Institute and one of its officers is none other than David J. Galton, whose work includes Eugenics, the Future of Human Life in the 21st Century. David Galton has written that the Human Genome Mapping Project, originally dreamt up by Galton's former president, Walter Bodmer, had enormously increased the scope for eugenics because of the development of a very powerful technology for the manipulation of DNA. This new, wider definition of eugenics, Galton has said, would cover methods of regulating population numbers as well as improving genome quality by selective artificial insemination by donor, gene therapy, or gene manipulation of germline cells. And expanding on this new definition, Galton is neutral as to whether some methods should be made compulsory by the state or left entirely to the personal choice of the individual. So who gets the safest vaccines? Well, considering the degree to which the players and institutions behind the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, including the lead developer, are tied and connected to institutions that have been instrumental in the rise and perpetuation of racial eugenics, it's concerning that this particular vaccine is being portrayed by scientists and media alike as the COVID-19 vaccine for the poor and the global south. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine sells at a fraction of the cost of its COVID-19 vaccine competitors, earning between $3 and $5 per dose. Moderna and Pfizer cost $25 to $37 and $20 per dose, respectively. As CNN recently reported, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine will be far easier to transport and distribute in developing countries than its rivals, several of which complicated and costly cold supply chains. When the Thomson Reuters Foundation asked several experts which COVID-19 vaccine could reach the poorest soonest, all declared a preference for the Oxford AstraZeneca candidate. I think now we understand why, right? There is also the added fact that a host of safety issues have come to surround the vaccine. Recently, on November 21st, a 41-year-old participant in AstraZeneca's clinical trial who lives in India sent a legal notice to the Serum Institute of India, alleging that the vaccine caused him to develop acute neuroencephalopathy, or brain damage. In the notice, the participant said that he must be compensated, in the least, for all the sufferings that he and his family have undergone and are likely to undergo in the future. In response, the Serum Institute claimed that the participant's medical complications are unrelated to the vaccine trial and said it would take legal action against the brain-damaged participant for maligning the company's reputation, seeking damages in excess of $13 million. This is the first time I have ever heard of a sponsor threatening a trial participant, Amar Jasani, editor of the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, said of the incident. The Serum Institute has received at least $18.6 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and has a deal with AstraZeneca to manufacture 1 billion doses of the vaccine. And by the way, if you don't know the history of Bill and Melinda Gates' vaccines in India, I would encourage you to do the research, or you can go on my archives page and look up the exposed Bill Gates piece in that I did, covering a lot of that stuff as well. It's very eye-opening. Other manufacturers chosen by Oxford AstraZeneca to produce their vaccine are also no strangers to controversy. For instance, their manufacturing partner in China, Shenzhen Kengtai Biological Products, has been at the center of controversy for years, especially after 17 infants died from its Hep B vaccine in 2013. The New York Times cited Yangzhang Huang, a senior fellow for global health at the Council on Foreign Relations, as saying, "Imagine if a similar scandal is reported again in China. It's not just going to undermine the confidence of the company manufacturing the vaccine, it's also going to hurt the reputation of AstraZeneca itself and their vaccine too." In another example, the manufacturing partner chosen to produce the vaccine in the U.S. is a scandal-ridden company with ties to the 2001 anthrax attacks, Emergent Biosolutions. Emergent Biosolutions, previously known as Bioport, has a long track record of knowingly selling and marketing products that were never tested for safety and efficacy, including its anthrax vaccine Biothrax and its biodefense product Trobigard. The current head of quality control for Emergent Biosolutions' lead manufacturing facility in the U.S. has no expertise in pharmaceutical manufacturing and is instead a former high-ranking military intelligence official who operated in Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond. The issue raised by their decision to partner with the manufacturers with dark histories of product safety issues are compounded by the adverse reactions reported in the Oxford AstraZeneca trials, as well as the ways in which those trials have been conducted. In September, AstraZeneca was forced to pause its experimental COVID-19 vaccine trial after a woman in the UK developed a suspected serious reaction that the New York Times reported as consistent with transverse myelitis. TEM is a neurological disorder characterized by inflammation of the spinal cord, a major element of the central nervous system. It often results in weakness of the limbs, problems emptying the bladder, and paralysis. Patients can become severely disabled, and there is currently no effective cure. Concerns over an association between TM and vaccines is well established. A review of published cases in 2009 documented 37 cases of the TM associated with various vaccines, including Hep B, measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, among others, in infants, children, and adults. The researchers in Israel noted the associations of different vaccines with a single autoimmune phenomenon allude to the idea that a common denominator of these vaccines, such as an adjuvant, might trigger this syndrome. Even the New York Times article on the AstraZeneca trial notes past speculation that vaccines might be able to trigger TEM. In July, an Oxford AstraZeneca trial participant developed symptoms of TEM, and the vaccine trial was paused at that time. An independent panel ultimately concluded the illness was unrelated to the vaccine, and the trial continued. Yet, as Nikolai Petrovsky from Flinders University told the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, these panels are typically made up of biostatisticians and also medical representatives from the sponsored drug company running the trial. Then, in October, a trial participant in Brazil died, though in that case AstraZeneca suggested that the person was part of the control group and thus hadn't received the COVID-19 vaccine. According to Forbes, the AstraZeneca vaccine was ineffective at stopping the spread of coronavirus in their animal trials. All 6 monkeys injected with AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine became infected with the disease after being inoculated. All the monkeys were put to death, which means that it will remain unknown whether those monkeys would have suffered other adverse effects. Another concern is that the trial administrators gave the trial control group for both human and animal trials, Pfizer's Nemenrix, a meningitis vaccine as opposed to a saline solution, which is regarded as the gold standard for controls because researchers can be sure the saline solution won't cause any adverse reactions. Using Pfizer's meningitis vaccine as a control placebo allows AstraZeneca to downplay any adverse reactions in its COVID-19 vaccine group by showing that the control group suffered adverse reactions as well. The meningitis vaccine in the AstraZeneca trial is what I would call a faux SIBO, a fake control, whose real purpose is to disguise or hide injury in the vaccines group, said Mary Holland, General Counsel at Children's Health Defense. And the last section of this, I didn't think I'd get through it, but here we are. Eugenics under another name. Despite these safety concerns and clinical trial scandals, close to 160 countries have purchased the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, and now reports are suggesting that India, the country with the second largest population on Earth, is likely to approve this vaccine by next week. As documented here, while the vaccine may be heralded as vital for lower-income countries, the Oxford AstraZeneca project is no mere philanthropic pursuit. Not only is there a significant profit motive behind the vaccine, but its lead researcher's connection to the British Eugenics Society adds another level of warranted scrutiny. For those encountering stories of eugenicists, it's common to dismiss such activity as that of conspiracy theories. However, it's undeniable that several prominent individuals and institutions that remain active today have clear ties to eugenicist thinking, which was not so taboo just a few decades ago. Unfortunately, this holds true for the individuals and institutions associated with the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, who, as demonstrated in this article, immersed themselves in studies of race science and population control, primarily in Africa, while working closely with institutions that have direct and long-standing links to the worst of the eugenicist movement. As this series has shown, there are many concerns regarding the points where race and the COVID-19 vaccination campaign in the U.S. and abroad intersect, both publicly and privately. Part 1 of this series raised questions about the policy-shaping role of the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, which suggested that the U.S. government make COVID-19 vaccines available to ethnic minorities and the mentally challenged first. Part 2 explained how, in order to allocate COVID-19 vaccines in the U.S., health agencies are using a program created by Palantir, a company with a record of helping the U.S. agencies target ethnic minorities through immigration policy and racist policing. Furthermore, there are plans in place to exercise what could reasonably be described as economic coercion to pressure people to voluntarily get vaccinated. Such coercion will obviously be more effective on poor and working communities, meaning communities of color will be disproportionately affected as well. Considering these facts, and the case for scrutinizing the safety of Oxford AstraZeneca's affordable vaccine option made above, any harm caused by vaccine allocation policy in the U.S. and beyond is likely to disproportionately affect poor communities, especially communities of color. As such, the public should take all vaccine rollout policy with a grain of salt, even when they come cloaked in language of inclusion, racial justice, and public health preservation. As a co-founder of the American Eugenics Society, later renamed Society for the Study of Social Biology, Frederick Osborne put it in 1968. Eugenics goals are most likely to be attained under a name other than eugenics. So there you have it, folks. A little bit of a read on that one. Long read, I might add, but well worth it. I didn't realize there were 2 other parts of this. I may have to go back and dig that up and find that. But I'll drop the link out there. You guys can follow that to the article. Read for yourself. Great Game India has done a pretty good job of tracking a lot of Bill Gates, their foundation, and the vaccine damage and all that good stuff over the years. I would encourage you guys to check that out. So nonetheless, yet more info as the vaccines net start to roll out on this COVID-19. What we're starting to see what their true intentions are. Obviously, we know behind the scenes that there's more at play, more to the story, and obviously, again, as I've described in subsequent broadcasts, that this is not about a health issue. This is about their Great Reset plans. This just happens to be the cover, and this is all about control, plain and simple. And that's what it amounts to. So, that is going to do it for this broadcast. I appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll see you back on the next one here shortly. Probably get back to a little election coverage and whatnot. In the meantime, you can check out where you can find the broadcast here. And of course, if need be, you can always go back on the old archives over on UGEtube and soon to be Gab TV. So stay tuned on that. Give me a follow over on Gab, and we'll see you back here real soon. Take care, everybody. God bless.